and here. Bring that spice of beer. Don't drink, you gotta live. Bring that spice of beer. We gonna drink now and here.
But yeah,
Sure.
ordinarily, I get to say welcome to the pub, but here we are at Chad's new bistro, and I guess
Welcome to the Bistro.
yeah, heck yeah, man.
Cheers.
Here we go. So, once again, it's all about people I've met along the way and at the bars and pubs and interesting conversations I've had. And you were one of the guys I just keep coming back to. It's like every time I have a conversation with you, I have to go back and I got to research some stuff because it's like, how the fuck do you know all that? And it's just impressive the amount of knowledge you have. But let me go back to the beginning and talk about when we met. And it was like it happened twice because, well, I was at the bar and I was drinking. And
Yeah, and I don't remember this at all, so this is a new story for me,
yeah, this was
too.
at our Johnny Black's common location, sitting at the bar, and I think it was kind of getting late and it's starting to clear out, and I look over and I kept looking over. It's like, man, that guy looks like Matt Damon. I go, you know what? I go, you look like Matt Damon. And you're like, yeah, and it's like I get that a lot. And then we were talking. I think like a week or two later, the exact same scenario. I kept looking over and like, that fucker looks like Matt Damon. It's like, and like, yeah, we've had this conversation before. I'm like, oh shit.
That does happen to me a lot, very frequently.
Well, your resemblance is very, very close. I mean, and the other thing that was funny is people often refer to me like, they say, oh, you look like Russell Crowe. But you look at Russell Crowe like Gladiator, I'm like, yeah. And you look at Russell Crowe now, he looks like Santa Claus. I'm like, whoa, which Russell Crowe are we talking about here? But then I made the little funny thing a while back, and it was like you and I. It's like, oh, it's like getting Matt Damon and Good Will Hunting with Russell Crowe and A Beautiful Mind together. It's like these conversations we have get pretty high level and very deep, and that's what I love, and that's what the pub's all about: continuing those conversations,
Yeah.
and pulling things forward. But the place is looking beautiful, man. It's looking good, ready to go, and
Thank you.
it's been a journey for you, I know.
Long time coming, yeah.
Yeah. How far back do you want to go? Take us back to the beginning, or take us to the start of this, or?
Well,
Well, I guess we need some context before we get here, right?
Well, yeah, we can talk about, I guess, how I got started in the bistro, and
What made you want to go into business on your own?
Well, I guess I always have. Since I was like even a little kid, I used to beg my dad to start a business so that I could work there in like elementary school. I always thought about wanting to have my own business, and I just really fell into the restaurant industry. I worked in restaurants since I was 14 years old. I started at a concession stand, and I then became a dishwasher at a restaurant, moved up to appetizer cook, and then when I was 24, I started managing a bar, and got a lot of good experience there. And then
I'm sure those experiences were good.
yeah, well, it's wild. Working in the bar industry is wild.
I'm sure.
And ended up the owner of that bar ended up starting a chain while I was managing his initial bar. So he ended up having me help him train the staff and set everything up for his other bars. And I helped him open up 2 other locations, almost 3. It was 3, but before the third one got started, we had a bit of a falling out. It's actually the only job I've ever been fired from. And the situation was kind of ridiculous as to why I got fired, but
Sounds like a good story.
I mean,
But you don't have to go into that one if you want to move forward with your.
well,
your
I
history
mean,
here.
long story short, he tried to get me to come back multiple times, but he was the kind of a hot-headed guy, and he would fire people frequently, and especially when he was drunk, and then they would always come back. And I always said, if he does it to me, I'm not coming back. So he did do it to me under ridiculous circumstances.
It's kind of like a J.J. Jameson thing. You're fired. Oh, wait, no, you're hired again. You know?
Yeah, no, well, he went through his friends to try and get me to come back because he really was relying on me for that 4th bar. But I wasn't interested. I got another job, and I was, at that point, because I had been, running bars at that point, I was kind of depressed because I started going into being a grill cook again, and
Taking a step back.
I really, at that point, I really, because I had been thinking about it for a couple years, I wanted to start my own place. So that really gave me the motivation. So the first thing I did was try and raise money, and for that I went to my family, and they helped me out. I bought the Bistro in 2012. I had gotten fired in October of 2011, and I got a job the next day, because I went around and applied immediately and got a job. And like I said, I was working as a grill cook, a place called Basement Burger Bar in Farmington, and I was just on the grill making burgers, and I was really not happy. So I really set my mind to getting a business, and I looked around a lot. I went and looked at a lot of locations. At this point I was 26, and ended up settling on what became Chad's Bistro, which was actually an old Tubby's that it had been a Tubby's for 10 years, and the old owner had turned it into like a rip-off of Tubby's because they were sick of paying the franchise fees. It was
Chubby's
called
or
Quick Sub.
Okay.
And so he wasn't not doing a good job. It was a really he was about to get shut down by the health department before he
that would not be good.
closed. He was getting people sick. It wasn't good. So when I took the place over, I bought it for $25,000. The people I bought it from had purchased it from the guy who started Quick Sub. They only owned it, and they owned other Tubby's franchises, and they were sick of paying franchise fees too. But when they took it over, they cleaned it up, they replaced the equipment, and they didn't change the name. But in the neighborhood, it had a terrible reputation because people were literally getting sick. I mean, it was
Was that
garbage.
still in this neighborhood, or was this a different location?
Right here. Yeah, it's right in this neighborhood.
Right where your old, or your...
Yeah, where I was for 11 years.
Thank you.
Prior to closing it down to move into this location.
Gotcha.
And they fixed it up a lot. It was beautiful when I went into it. They got all new equipment, and the whole place was spotless, but it was literally doing $50 a day in sales. They bought it for $5,000 from the guy who was about to get shut down from the health department. They dumped a bunch of money into it, but didn't change the name. So they couldn't make it. They didn't know what to do to try and do anything original. It was just Tubby's, but it was called Quick Sub instead. And they had put it up for sale on Craigslist. It was probably like the 6th place I looked at. Kind of far from where I lived. I grew up in Commerce Township, so it was about 45 minutes away. But I knew Rochester was a good area. I hadn't really been out here very much, hardly at all, really, before I got it. But when I came to look at it, I drove around and saw, and I knew it was a nice area anyway. And this particular little corner of Rochester Hills was a little bit less developed than the rest of the city, It's cheaper to get in here. Excuse me. And so I got in, really cheap rent, $25,000 out the door to buy the place, and I took my but all I borrowed money for was to buy it. So I had the place, but I didn't even have stock or anything. So I took my last paycheck from the place I was at to buy my first stock.
Got that close there.
Yeah. And I ran it as Quick Sub for 7 weeks. So I bought it February 1st of 2012, ended up opening up in March, 3rd week of March, and as Chad's Bistro, because I went in and just started kind of selling stuff.
Did you make a big menu change at that point? Because the menu you have at the old Bistro was a massive menu and amazing food too.
Yeah.
So were there changes to the menu at that point, or?
Yeah, huge changes. When I first came in, I was intending on, for the first little bit until I could implement my menu, just selling their stuff. but their stuff was so low quality. Like, even though they had cleaned the place up and everything, like, it wasn't, but their product was just absolute garbage. And so I was like, you know what, I just can't even do this. So I took their menu and I just started doing stuff from scratch. So instead of using, sheets of steakums and then chicken-ums, which was just sheets of chicken, I just bought chicken and, and cut it up and cooked that instead. And instead of using the really low quality, like, hoagie rolls they had, I bought nice sub buns. And then while I was planning how I was going to do the new place, I ended up finding a local bakery, so that I could get fresh bread. And so he did my sub buns, and then I ended up getting my other white wheat and rye bread from a local baker in downtown Rochester, Breadwinner Bakery. He had been there for, I want to say, like 30 years.
That's a nice way to ratchet up a menu, though, just up the quality. I mean, baking your own bread, and that's one thing I noticed when I first came to Chad's Bistro. By the way, it was shortly after meeting you, I went in for my first sub, and your sign's got you on it, holding the sub. And I walk in, and the floor mat had you on it, holding the sub. And I look up, and there you are. You were holding the sub, and it's like, oh man, it's like, that's a trifecta right there. But I also noticed it about your foods there. It was just always so amazing. Like, this is just really good stuff. And I asked you why, and you don't use high grade stuff. And
yeah, and
it really shows.
Yeah, most of it's just doing it really. I mean, people say from scratch, it's just cooking. If you're pouring stuff out of a bottle or pulling it out of a bag out of the freezer, you're just warming stuff up. You're hardly even cooking, And, I had a lot of experience in cooking and bar management, and, I kind of knew what I was doing. Like, I always would make high quality stuff at home. I kind of had to do what I had to do when I was working for other people, but that gave me a lot of the core concepts of how to just pull a ticket and make food, like on the line. Prep-wise, it took a long time to develop everything, but I started just kind of reverse engineering the ingredients that were on the menu from the old place immediately, and just kind of figuring out how to just do it myself. And I had a lot of input from friends that were in the business and stuff too. And actually, I want to say the first 10 months, I didn't even have an employee at all. So I worked myself 7 days a week.
Holy crap.
Eventually, my friend Will, he started helping me out 1 day a week so I could start getting a day off. I want to say that was, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 months in. It was still really slow at that point, because keep in mind, it had been a $50 a day place. And it was literally
shake off an old reputation.
And basically had no business, right? You can't make money on $50 a day in sales. And so at the 10-month, what happened at 10 months was I was kind of desperate, because I was going to fail at that point. I didn't have any money. I had no way to pay rent. Like, I was basically at the end of my rope. And I ended up calling up the local newspapers to try and just see if I could get a story. So I ended up calling up a local newspaper called Community Lifestyles. They're part of a conglomerate that's actually got local newspapers like all over the place. And I talked to the person there, and they're like, yeah, we'll do a story. They're like, just buy an ad, and then we'll do a story. So I was like, okay, great. So I bought an ad in the paper. The ad really didn't do anything, but then they sent someone over. She wrote a story, and then I posted that on Facebook. And at the time, back in 2012, even back then, newspapers were a little more widely read, and I ended up getting swamped.
It's non-existent now, but yeah.
Yeah, but I got swamped. My sales went from $50 a day to like $400, $500 a day overnight. And that's a lot of food to sell, especially at the time my price point was like $8 a sandwich. And I had to do everything, all the prep, all the dishwashing, all the cleanup, absolutely everything myself. And so I got overwhelmed, and then I got my friend to buy in to be a partner. And then together we worked 7 days a week again for like another 6 months before we really got another employee. I did have a dishwasher working a little bit in that time period too. And then from there we just grew, and it became kind of a cult following because our sandwiches are so unique, they're so good. It was an 800 square foot place, and we had over 70 menu items, 52 sandwiches, sliders,
The big
salads.
chalkboards, and to me, it's one of those things where it's almost overwhelming. It's almost too much menu, but
Some people complained about that, but you know what? It is what it is. Just pick something.
yeah, as long as, I guess, I don't know that much about the food, making the foods and stuff, or all the different things you have to store to make all those different sandwiches, or I know things like Taco Bell or Italian places, like same couple ingredients, just rearranged differently, and they call it something different. It's not exactly what you got there.
I have a fair amount of redundancy, but I designed the menu so that nothing is only used in one dish. You don't want to do that. So I did have redundancy there. But with the high enough sales volume and a varied enough customer base to have different likes, I was solidly going through everything. I mean, yeah, I do have a lot of proteins, right? We do pastrami and corned beef and turkey and roast beef.
Making me hungry.
And chicken and steak, salmon, tuna. I mean, there was a lot of stuff, but we were always able to go through it. I mean, it was really busy. The main thing that held me back is it was 800 square feet, and I only sat 20 people, which is why I'm moving here, so that I can, now I've got a total of 4,100 square feet. I'm going to seat over 100 people. I have a liquor license, it's...
And a bar.
Exactly. I think the beer and sandwiches are going to go really well together.
Yeah, and honestly, that was another thing I noticed when the previous place this was, came in here a few times and did not like it. And it's around the corner from Johnny Black's where we met, and I thought, man, and this place didn't even have food. I'm like, it's got a huge kitchen back there. I'm like, I think you came in one day and said, man, if I could take your food and put it in that bar, I could give, the other bar, Johnny Black's, which was doing a hell of a business, could give them a good run.
Yeah.
And I think the two of them being in close proximity would actually elevate each other because it would be more of a draw to the area.
I think so too. I think it's going to be good for both of us.
Because you can literally bar crawl between the two places. I mean, a couple blocks. Good ideas, people. Come on.
And it's a different scene too. This isn't going to be a sports bar.
Right.
I call it a nerd bar.
Yeah, you got books and games and stuff like that, and video games. I mean, this is going to be a different vibe here. And
yeah, we're going to be. I want people playing board games. It's not going to be. We're not going to have a loop of ESPN on a bank of TVs that are in your face all the time. It's going to be. I want it to be more social. So
what I'm all about.
Yeah, and I want people to hang out here, because sometimes when I'm describing it to people, they think, well, you just want like a family restaurant or something. It's like, well, not really. I do want families to come in here and eat, but I would like to have a late night crowd as well. And I think that people socializing, and that's the thing about board games, is they help you socialize. I was really inspired by a board game bar I went to. I actually got advice on doing this from a random person I met at the bar, because when I was first starting it, I was thinking of ideas of what exactly I'm going to do, because you need to have some kind of draw to come in, right? And you obviously have the food, but I was thinking, okay, well, I'm going to have chessboards. I'm going to have stacks of chessboards and chess pieces. People can come in and play chess. And I ran into this random lady at the bar.
I'm good. I like chess. I'm good.
And well, my worry about that though was that chess isn't really a fun game. I mean, I played it my whole life. I love chess, but it's stressful. It's a highly skilled game. If you're playing a game of chess against someone who's relatively in your league of play,
it's a battle.
It's not really fun. It's like and I was afraid that I was telling this lady I met at the bar, like, people might not really I didn't see like a chess bar working. And she's like, well, why don't you just have all kinds of board games? And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, why not? I was like, and she told me to go to this other bar in Ferndale called The Corner, and to check it out and see how that was. And I did. I went with a couple friends and had the time of my life. And I made an effort to look around in the bar, because normally when you're in a bar, restaurant, pretty much anywhere really, everyone is
you can
on
look
the
right
phone.
down the bar, everyone's, and people across the tables. That's one of my things is you're out to socialize, sit down, put that phone away, turn it off, So, and like what you're saying here is like a board game bar, it would be family friendly. I'd love to be able to bring my kids here, and we'll be here if they don't destroy the place, but we'll sit down and have board games and unplug, interact with people, and again, that's kind of what this is all about, just interacting with people and get off those phones. So, unless you're watching on a phone, then just stay on this for a while. Anyway.
That night I went to The Corner, I made an effort to walk around and look at everyone. I did not see a single person on their phone. Every table was filled with people having a good time, engaged, laughing and talking. That is really rare now, that you don't see people staring at a screen.
Good.
Right? Because even if they're not on their phone, they're still staring at ESPN.
TV,
and it's just a loop of whatever sports highlights of the day. Right? Drink their beer and stare. That's not what I want, and that's why I say, like, I don't want it to just be a restaurant where you just come in and eat. I want it to be a social bar. And I think board games are a good social lubricant. Like, people, when you're playing a game, you're looking at the board, you're engaging, you're thinking about it, it engages your mind a little bit. Just watching sports, there's no engagement whatsoever, really. I mean, you might yell at the TV or whatever, but it's the same thing over and over and over, day in, day out. It's the same game getting played over and over, same rules. And it's everywhere too. You can go a mile in each direction and find a sports bar, right? We don't need another sports bar.
I mean, virtually every bar is kind of a sports bar by virtue of all the TVs they have, and big games on. It's always on the TVs, and they even take over the audio a lot of times, the big games, and that's okay. And sometimes it's a good atmosphere, but sometimes I personally like to get away from that. I like going to places to have a conversation. Last night was a Friday night, and I wanted to get out. I ended up going all the way down into Auburn Hills, and Duffy's was there, but no live band, too loud, and there was a little. My brain's freezing up, but there was a microbrew there, and I stopped in there. It was really quiet, and they actually had a shelf with board games, and there was a couple people playing chess on the other side of the bar. It was quiet. Struck up a conversation with the bartender, and I was good with that. That's what I want, and I think you're creating an environment here where we can have a lot more of that in a much bigger space.
I think
I'm excited.
I think this is a niche that isn't filled in this area. If you go to Detroit or you go to Ferndale or Royal Oak, you have all kinds of niche bars everywhere. It's not just sports bars, but up here, Rochester, Shelby Township, most of the suburbs, really, pretty much everything is just a sports bar.
Yeah, they're all kind of the same.
The menus are almost identical. Maybe they're a little different here and there, but it's pretty much the same thing. There's a bank of TVs. There's Keno. I'm not doing Keno. A lot of people are mad at me about that. It's just Michigan Lottery.
You know what?
For people who don't know, it's giving money to the schools, right? They want you to, you're paying into this. Basically, it's losing. Keno is basically the worst. Well, it's the worst. Yeah, but it's the worst gambling odds wise. I mean, other than playing like the big lotteries, it's the absolute worst. It pays out like 1% or something. If you go to a casino and play a slot machine, you're way better off than playing Keno. But then all the barflies sit around and dump so much money into that, and then that goes into the school system, which I'm not a fan of. So,
I won $500 in Keno. Yeah, but you throw a couple grand at it throughout the year to get there.
Yeah, and then they're using it to brainwash kids in the schools. So I'm, not a fan.
There's a subject we can get into.
I'm not going to participate in that system.
And one of the things I'm trying to do here is honor our servers too. And honestly, you're you started out that path, but now you're a business owner, and but I like to interview bartenders and staff and ask them about the things that annoy them, and one of the things they keep saying is that freaking Keno, and people keep wanting to play that. It's so annoying. It's like, yeah, it just takes them away from doing what they got to do. Just for that,
and they don't get tipped on it.
Yeah.
Then people never tip on it. Maybe if they win, but it's so rare to win.
Right.
And then even if you do win, you're so far behind to begin with. It's not like you're going to tip huge on it. And people get mad because for whatever reason they want to get they think that they can pick numbers and it's going to make a difference, and then they want to get their ticket in so that they can try and get their numbers. So they'll get mad if the server doesn't grab their ticket because, if their numbers randomly happen to come up, then it's the server's fault for not getting on it, which is ridiculous because it's completely random.
And then they get mad at the server, which ends up in a worse tip, and you got a pissed off server, which is not good for your customers. And yeah, that's a bad cycle.
They have just as good of a chance of the server helping them out because their numbers came in last. Literally, the exact same chance every draw. I mean, it's completely random.
There's got to be a numerologist to understand it.
Well, people think they are. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's absolutely insane. And and in the casinos, the government mandates for slot machines a certain level of wins, right? So you're not allowed to just have people lose all the time. The government, right? But when it comes to the government's gambling, they don't pay out anything. Keno is a gigantic ripoff.
But it's for the school.
The scratch offs are a ripoff. The pull tabs are a ripoff. And the big lottery is obviously a ripoff. But I don't want to participate in that. You do. It is somewhat lucrative for bar owners because they give you 2% of the sales, and then you also get a percentage of the winnings. I think it's like maybe 1% of the winnings as well. Huh. So if someone hits big, which is highly unlikely, you get a percent of that, which it can add up. If people are playing a lot of Keno, it's definitely money in your pocket, and there's no investment really. You just have to get your lotto license.
Kind of. I mean, yeah, that's a nice tangent to go off, but on these electronic distractions and ways to separate people from their money. And one of the things I've always thought of is the old saying of a fool and his money are soon parted, and that tends to happen. I mean, but there's a lot of different ways of pulling money away from fools like that. And for me, gambling, I don't like to gamble because my luck is such that I'll lose a coin toss like 80% of the time, and I don't know how that's possible, but I just do. But so I don't like to gamble. But
with Keno, it's just losing. You're losing. I mean, it's the worst odds you can get of any gambling whatsoever. It's a scam, and then they use it supposedly to fund the schools, which even if I liked the public school system, you still can argue money is just money, so they can just pull money from the school budget and put the lottery money towards the school, and then they can put that money towards anything that they want.
So Rochester Hills in this area is a pretty nice area for Michigan, and I recently had to move my kids from one district to another when I moved, and I had to go to all the different school buildings to kind of get everything straightened up. And I walk into these buildings, I'm like, wow, these are really nice buildings. I'm like, wait a minute, our tax money paid for all this crap. I'm like, holy crap. I mean, they don't need all this administration. They don't need these big buildings. I don't understand. But
well, my main argument is even with that kind of stuff. I mean, they probably spend the money poorly anyway, but when kids come out of school trusting authority, they don't think for themselves. They're basically taught to trust authority. And that is what I don't agree with.
Me either.
I mean, and it can be beneficial, especially for the more gifted students in mathematics, to go through and learn math when they're going to use that, if they're going to be an engineer or whatever. Very small percentage, right? And most people, though, who go through school don't really use most of the stuff that they learn in school. They'd be better off
all the way through college. That's true, honestly.
You'd be better off apprenticing, learning something, and that's kind of what my son did. He didn't go to college, so I had a child when I was 17 years old, my son Lucas, and so he was 9 years old when I started the Bistro, and I was basically living at the Bistro, right? I had him, so 7 days a week I was there, so I had to have my son. So what happened was he was there with me, and he learned the restaurant business. He's now currently a partner in my new place, because the old Bistro I turned into a taco place, and Lucas,
Another good place.
is now running it. And it's just like in the old days when you see what your dad does and he teaches it to you, and then
Yep.
you take over the trade. And there's no real need for college there. He's not burdened with a bunch of debt. He became an entrepreneur at 20 years old, and why not? He didn't need it. And I think it was and it was his decision too. It was not mine. So he wanted to do it. But most people, when you come out of school, you can't think. They teach you to just accept authority, right? There's an expert who knows what they're talking about, and you're going to learn what they say and then repeat it, and that's how you pass a test, right? You're repeating what people are telling you. That's not bad for mathematics, I suppose, because it's pure logic, right? It's hard to fake it. But when it comes to the rest of your education, like I said, very few people use advanced mathematics in their day-to-day life. They basically just accept whatever the status quo is. It's just made them into just cogs in the system, right?
Yeah, even in school, I can remember, I asked a lot of questions in school, got me in trouble with some of the nuns, but Catholic schools, but there was something I have always wondered, it's like, why don't we teach money? Why don't we teach finances? Why don't we teach some of the things these basic skills that we should have by the end of high school? How to balance a checkbook, things like that. I mean, why don't we know the differences between mortgages and rent and stuff like that? Why don't we know any of that? Those are skills that we should have right out there. So why aren't they taught? But I mean,
they shouldn't even need to teach those in school. That should just be taught by your parents. But you don't spend enough time with your parents because your parents are working all the time, and they bring you to a group of experts in pedagogy, right? The science of teaching students. It means it's basically
this is where I get in trouble. Like, okay, I'm going to have to look that word up.
Pedagogy is the science of instructing children. Okay, and
I'm going to trust you on that one.
And that's what it is. And the way that instruction works now is you accept what's told. They tell you what reality is, and then they test you, and then you repeat that back to them. And you do that over and over and over and over again until you come out of school and you have a certain way of thinking about the world that is beneficial for the people who are running the education system, not really for you. I think, long story short, I don't want to support that system.
Gotcha.
Right? When it comes to, and that's what the lottery supports, and I'm not going to do that here. So I don't care if I could make $1 million a year doing it. I don't care. I'm not supporting it because morally,
I think this is a good point. We'll take a quick break here, and then we'll come back around to the next thing. I know there's some other topics you want to get onto, but we'll take a break and we'll come right back.
The internet went down for 3 hours this morning, plunging the nation into productivity. The outage, which caused major work startages from New York to California, prevented an estimated 120 million American employees from messing around on the web at work.
More on your news.
How lovely is it to go for a drive on a beautiful Saturday afternoon? Sun is shining, things are great. Got a cub with a dog with me. Right, pal? Yeah, good reaction. So I've been thinking a lot about roundabouts, and yeah, they're more efficient in slower traffic, lower traffic kind of situations, but when they get really bulked up and there's a lot of people trying to jam through at the same time, and half the people on the road don't know how to manage a roundabout, it gets really kind of tedious and frustrating. Not that there's not already enough road rage here in Michigan, But yeah. But there's some other drawbacks to roundabouts that we don't often talk about. And one thing is, like, just driving around, you spill all your groceries in the back. You know, we all drive big SUVs now. They all open backs. They give you plastic sack grocery bags. And you put them in the back of a flat SUV cargo area. Take one hard turn and slosh. Everything goes flying out. Roundabouts are really good for that, especially when you're doing a 270-degree turn. But, you know, there's other drawbacks too, like, you know, when you got your dog with you. What's up, buddy? You gotta sit up. Talk to the camera, pal. Roundabouts. Here we go. You enter a roundabout. Dang it, it's all trafficy. Driving through the roundabout, and you enter the roundabout, there's nobody coming, so you can go through. Oh, crap. Oh, dude, what are you doing? Crap. Oh, man. Cabo? Did you spill the beer? Is that you? Crap. You got one job, buddy. One job. You drunk again?
Bring us pints of beer. Don't drink, you can live. Bring us pints of beer. We gonna drink now and here. Bring us pints of beer. Don't drink, you can live.
Some dogs just can't handle day drinking. I'd say I'm not very good at it either.
Okay, so back at the bistro. The pub is back at the bistro, I should say.
Cheers.
And we're going to talk a little bit about our broken education system and how Chad and I think we can fix, or at least make some changes to make it better. You were alluding to, or I don't even remember where we left off while we were recording, but we talked a little bit afterwards. But you were alluding to some changes that you would want to make. Maybe just start there a little bit, and I was agreeing with some of it, and from my own observation.
The default for children is to want to play, and playing is learning, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you're learning socialization, lots of stuff, and I think in school the default is your butt's in a chair, and you're listening to an authority figure. And then you get these breaks, these short breaks that they call recess, right? Where in between, where you're forced to learn, if you want to call it that, whatever they're pushing down your throat. I think the default should be a recess. I think you start there. So if I were to design my school, there would be no attendance requirements, because if the parents don't want to have the kids there for whatever reason, they want them at home or need it for something else.
That's left over from the industrial age, right? When they want attendance and they want everything happening on time, kind of structure.
It should be completely voluntary from start to finish, and the default should be recess. And if I were to design a school, kids would be begging to go there because it would be so much more fun than just sitting at home, right? Or even playing with a couple friends in your neighborhood or whatever, because you've got all your friends there, and we're not going to force you to do anything. But I think eventually what kids would do is they would get bored of play, right? And then they're going to want to exercise their mind a little bit more, right? And at that point, what they're interested in, what I would want is to have mentors there that would be capable of teaching them skills if they want to have them, or giving them knowledge. And if the child gets bored with the jungle gym and the socialization, then they can say, hey, come to the history mentor and, learn about U.S. history, world history, whatever. If you want to learn mathematics, you go to the math mentor and you learn that. If you want to learn science and how to operate and create an experiment in a laboratory, you go there. And I think that over time, the children that would be educated in that kind of a system would just gravitate towards what they want to do. And what they want to do might not even be intellectual. So they might not even need that type of school instruction. What if they want to be a mechanic? What if they want to be a carpenter? Then, you know.
Those are trades, yeah.
Yeah, and with that stuff, a lot of times you'll see what your dad does, and you're going to want to learn from him, right? And so I think that apprenticeship, I mean, for all intents and purposes, really, apprenticeship is all that works. Most people who go to college don't apply directly what they did in college to their job.
No, it's
mostly they
something
get
like-
trained.
There's a Pareto principle to what they learn in school. It's like something about 20% of what they learn is the majority of what they use. The other 80% is just fluff and filler.
Yeah.
And you could be more well-rounded, more enriched or whatever, but it's usually just BS.
Yeah, and after you graduate college and you get your job, you can't just start the job. You have to be trained.
Yeah.
Which is essentially
train you anyway,
apprenticeship.
yeah.
Right? So why waste all the time in school doing things that you don't need?
Not just the time, but the cost. And the cost is astronomical. So when you look at return on investment on college education, it's becoming less and less worth it.
Oh, it's terrible.
It's getting worse rapidly.
And depending on what you want to get into. Now, if you're going to go into academia or engineering, something like that, I do think higher education does have a purpose there. Because you'll be doing in school kind of what you're going to do in your job,
Yeah.
right? So if you want to become a historian or something like that, then perhaps going through a college level type history course or program over years that allows you to expand on that, that's fine. But I think that's a very small percentage of people that are going to want to get into academia, right?
And then the usefulness of it in the real world too. I mean, yes, there are some uses for real historians and stuff like that, but in all honesty, I mean, they don't make the world go round. I mean,
no, they don't.
They're good at telling us about things or explaining things, but yeah. So let's go back to, like childhood or grade school level. Would you, in your model, would you have something like a grade level, like age? No?
Absolutely not. I think that's one of the worst. Actually, now that you bring it up, I'm glad you did. I think that's probably one of the worst aspects of the public education system is the age-based grouping. I think a lot of that actually damages the children socially. I think that's why there's a lot of bullying.
Puts them in direct competition with each other.
Well, and yes, and children are selfish from the outset because they have to be, because they're totally dependent, right? And as children grow, they become more empathetic. And I think it would even be beneficial. So if you have a group of children with age ranges that, go from whatever the, I don't know, preschool to kindergarten age where they can really start socializing on their own kind of, and all the way up to, almost like middle school age. We're talking about young children. If older kids see younger kids bullying, right, they're probably going to step in because it's going to click in their mind, like the other kids in their age maybe wouldn't, that this isn't right. They're not going to want to see one kid bullying another one. And I think that kind of social interaction is going to create healthier social structures long term. And in addition to that, children learn at different levels.
Very true.
Right? So going through the grade system in your age group is useless. What you need to be doing is you need to be learning at your own pace, and then when you've learned it, then you can move on. It doesn't, the grade and the age doesn't matter. And like I said, there's a lot of kids who don't necessarily need in-depth scientific, historical, mathematical education because they're not necessarily going to use it. Now, it should be available to them if they want to do it.
In my opinion, I think they should at least know the basics of each. And then anyone that want to pursue further, they should be enabled to.
And your parents can, yeah, exactly. But I mean, my son read before he went to kindergarten. I read before I went to kindergarten because my dad just well, he realized that from just showing me flashcards when I was really, really young, that I picked up on it and I liked it. I didn't need to be forced to read. In fact, it's funny, actually, my parents used to ground me from reading. So I was so,
Imagine that.
I never put a book down, okay, after I learned to read. And when my parents
Sorry,
would
son, you
ground
can be a little
me,
dumber. Give me that book.
well, the thing was, is they would ground me, and I'd be like, okay, what am I going to do anyway? I'm just going to sit in my room and read. So then they realized it wasn't really a punishment because all I wanted to do was read anyway. So they started saying, no reading. And I would sneak and read, and then, my dad would burst in the room and be like, no reading. Put the book back. Because that was the
That is the
punishment for me.
opposite of what most kids have. I mean, like, wow.
Yeah, I mean,
Impressive.
Because it wasn't. They realized it wasn't a punishment for me to just tell me to go to my room and read, because that's basically what I did anyway. I didn't really care. And for me, learning something like history, like a lot of people don't like history, and I don't blame them. Right? They just don't care.
I hated it as a kid. I love it now, but I hated it as a kid. And it wasn't until I actually had some real experience in I worked at Willow Run, which is an old plant that actually had purpose in World War II. And there's old train tracks that go through the building. They weren't used anymore. The floor was made of wooden block. I'm like, wow, this is like strange. It's all strange stuff in there. And there's gigantic doors at the end that open up. It's like, well, they used to bring in on train raw materials, cast and found everything, and machine and everything. And on the other side, they would fly an airplane out. I'm like, holy shit. The plant was a mile long. It was massive.
And that history is intriguing to you. Well,
Right.
let me ask
And
you a
it- and
question.
It drew me into it, right?
Why did you hate history as a kid?
Because it was boring.
Right. So
There was no correlation for me with the old stuff. It's like, I just want to know what's around me, I just want to know this stuff. I want to know, toy truck, I want to take it apart. I want to figure out how it works. What's a motor? What's a battery? What's all this stuff? I just want to know how gears work.
Well, I'm going to extrapolate from that a little bit and say, because it was forced on you. They're like,
Yeah.
you have to, this is
Yeah.
the book, you're going to learn this now,
Yeah.
and we're going to test you on this,
Yeah.
and then your parents are going to judge you based
Yeah.
on what your grade is, and they're like, you got to get an A or a B or whatever it is, and whatever their standard is for you, and then you're not having fun. You don't like that stuff. So, and that was the problem. Now you like history,
Yeah.
because it's voluntary.
Yeah.
Right? That's the key.
So, yeah, me personally, I was, when I was interested, I was always a B student, no problem. Not even an issue. When I wasn't interested, it was, C's and D's and struggling. And a lot of it depended on the teacher, a lot of it depended on the subject and my readiness to learn it, right? And when I was ready to learn, I would absorb like a sponge, and it was not a problem. So let me get back to, childhood development, things like that, and my similarities to what you were stating. In my personal experience, understanding like children with ADD and what they really need, not medication, they need physical activity.
It's
so what
drugs.
you're saying,
It's not medication, it's drugs.
okay, agreed. So no pharmaceuticals, I guess, but what they need is they need physical movement. They can't sit in a chair. They start fidgeting. They get disinterested. Their mind goes elsewhere. So what I've noticed is if you get a kid up, you get them out, physically run them around, let them play, they'll come back, they'll be calm, they'll be ready to learn and ready to sit and play. So similar to what you're saying, I thought they should still have structured classes, but in between each class should be 15-20 minutes of recess. Maybe more, maybe half an hour. And I want to stretch out the school day till it's at least 8 hours so a parent can go to work and do a full day's worth of work and come back and pick up their kid. And if the schools are going to work within a time frame of that, a lesser time frame, single parents, we got to either pay for additional to have their kids there early and or late, and those times they have the kids there doing almost nothing. But anyway, if they opened up the school day, you have a class at a certain time and you have an open time where you get out, run around and play, and then they can get back to class, and then just kind of space that out throughout the day. I think it would be a much better method overall. And
It would be, but I still think that ultimately learning needs to be voluntary. kids are not going to absorb things unless they want to.
True.
Even the smart kids, they're going to, I mean, most people forget most of what they learned in school. You know, I mean, go and try and take a test from a middle schooler or something like that. It's actually kind of difficult, right? You don't remember it. And the reason that you don't is because at the time you were forced into it. You didn't care, right? If you had cared about history, then you would have learned it. And it actually will put a negative connotation in your head when you're forced into something, you know? The first book that I read that was a real book, my dad sat me down, and because I learned how to read the alphabet on flashcards when I was 18 months old.
Wow.
And at the time, my dad was laid off. He worked in a factory. He worked for Smith & Wesson, actually, and they laid him off, and my mom was still working, and my dad didn't like changing diapers. He was on unemployment for a bit. I guess. I'm not exactly sure, probably for a little bit at least, but he was laid off for quite a while. And so he had me while my mom was at work, and because he didn't like changing diapers, he started sitting me on the toilet for extended periods of time. And of course I would get bored of that, so in order to entertain me, he got some flashcards. And then he started saying the letter and holding it up to me, and he realized that I was able to comprehend what the letters were. So I learned the alphabet at that point. And
That's a bit of genius now that I think about it. You're potty training and teaching a kid to read at 18 months.
Yeah.
Like, dang, man.
And he potty trained me
girls,
really young.
I should have started earlier.
Well, and it's because he did, who wants to wipe a butt, you know? He was like, oh, you know, and I don't blame him. So, and it was great. But then I was able to put the letters together into words. He realized I had a knack for it. So they started showing me words. So at about 2 years old, I started being able to read at like a kindergarten level.
Wow.
I could read like basic books. And when I was 5, my dad sat me down and we read the biography of Ronald Reagan. And what we did is he took a dictionary. It took a long time. It took months. So he got a dictionary, and anytime I didn't know the definition of a word, we would look it up in the dictionary. So in order for me to get through a couple pages took a long time because I didn't know what most words meant. But I could sound them out because I knew the sound that was associated with the letter. So I could sound them out, and then I'd be like, I don't know what that means. So and we got through the entire book. It took a few months, right? He did not have to force me to do that. There was no force required whatsoever. I wanted to do it. To me, it was like playing. And that's what learning should be like, is like playing. And then from there, I just read. Like, I never stopped. At that time, I always had a book in my hand at all times. Most of the time fiction, although I did, even back then, read some nonfiction. But yeah, I started reading science fiction and fantasy at around 7 years old. And I think that's definitely that's one of the things I'm most grateful for to my father, was realizing that I had this interest in reading and learning like that through self-learning.
It's impressive to sit with you and teach you that and have that kind of patience too. I love learning too, but even sometimes teaching my daughters was a little bit more of just a task.
Well,
sometimes.
I remember him being excited, very, very excited. I mean, we had a video camera early. I mean, this was in the 80s.
I got a genius.
So he got me on video camera, like saying the alphabet off flashcards, when I was 1.5 years old, and stuff like that. So he could bring the tapes and show my grandparents and stuff.
Yeah, if you have that,
he was excited.
I could roll that in something.
I might. I have to ask my mom. I don't know. We have a bunch of old VHS.
That's impressive, though. No, yeah, I actually I still have a VHS to DVD machine, or I can still take the VHS and I can digitize the stuff. So even if you had old VHS tapes, I have a bunch of stuff on 8mm camera. I just need a camera that can play 8mm, and I can digitize it, which believe it or not, I was trying to do stuff like this way back then. And this is way before internet days. This is like early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And I got an 8mm camera. I'm setting it up in a living room. I'm sitting in a wicker chair, long hair, baseball cap, and I'm trying to do just like a talk show with my friends. And we're talking about RC cars and stuff. It's just, I've been trying to do this kind of stuff for a while, but I've always had an innate curiosity to do certain things, and I've been lucky enough to have, like my stepdad was very, very generous to, he had this beautiful camera, an 8mm camera, like back in the day, it was like a $900 camera or something like that, and I'm like, he's like, yeah, go. I'm like, cool.
Yeah.
And the amount of things I did with that, I strapped it to the RC cars and I'm running it down the road at 40 miles an hour.
And think about how much you learned from doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's exactly
and I got really good at analog editing. And it wasn't until years later my daughter started getting into watching YouTube stuff. I'm like, you know what? I don't want to see you watching this stuff. Let's go do it, and let's go do this as kind of a family, and you'll make memories with your dad. You know,
Yeah.
and these videos will last because they're digital. They'll last forever. And so that's when I started like the Kiley Girl channel and started doing all that stuff with the girls. And you know, my oldest has gotten a little to the point where a little too cool for school, and I don't want to be teased by my friends right now. It's like, well, she's kind of getting in a different mode, but the little one still wants to do some stuff. But it's that kind of play too, and even play as an adult. This to me is playing. This is fun. I mean,
It's constructive.
I'll record it, and I don't even care that a ton of people watch it or not. I just doing it because I love it, and carrying on the good conversations we have. And so I don't know. We're talking for a while on education. I don't know if there's any other points you want to bring on that, or do you want to go into higher education, or do you want to start moving into another subject that actually I would prefer you educate me on?
Well, I think education...
I mean, I'm talking education by you just transferring your knowledge upon me. Give me some of your wisdom, man.
Well, I think if you want to live in a free society, then education needs to be completely voluntary. Compulsory school is detrimental. I think that children and parents should be able to decide how they're educated, what they learn, and there should be, hopefully there would be a variety of choices for that kind of stuff. There shouldn't be any mandatory, you have to show up at this time and then this is what you do and this is what you get tested on, because most kids they're going to lose interest in that kind of stuff. I know I lost a lot of interest in, for full disclosure, I never graduated high school. I dropped out when I was 15. Physically. I mentally dropped out probably around 12. I stopped doing work because I didn't want to be there. I absolutely hated school. I didn't want to be there. I loved learning, but I learned on my own. It was learning in school for me was very difficult. I learned very, very little in school. I think I could do basic arithmetic and read before I even went to school, right? Because, I mean, any parent should be able to teach multiplication, division, addition, subtraction for the most part. I mean, I think that that's pretty ubiquitous, is that people can do arithmetic. You know, even if you're not good at doing it in your head, you know that at least the concepts
and
you can
should
say,
be able to come up with
type
reasons,
this into a calculator.
Reasons in play, whether it's a board game or actual physical play outdoors.
Yeah.
How to use math, right? I'm like, you want to do monkey bars? Do the monkey bars. How many bars is that? Okay, count that. Okay, how many bars can you do? How fast can you do it? And then just building some calculations off that and teaching that. You can teach statistics. You and your friends have races on these types of things, and we'll figure that out. And we can build statistics, and you can make learning very fun that way. And it's useful math for something that you can learn to do, and you can reapply that to something else.
Yeah, and now my daughter is 16 months old, and when we go to the playground, on the play structure, as she walks up the stairs, we say 1, 2, 3, 4, and she started mimicking it, right? And now when we're counting stuff out, she doesn't really enunciate it that well, but she'd be like, you know, at like it kind of like.
Well, that's something that's very ancient too, is learning with a rhythm. Like that's why I mean, you can think of Irish that were very poetic and stuff like that, but they would learn things through song. And a song builds a pattern in your head, and that's something you can remember very easily.
Yeah.
That's how people
Music
told
is
stories through songs, yeah. Yeah, and there's mathematics and music too.
And
yeah.
her mom is a music teacher, so she's been being taught music since she was in the womb, because her mom was teaching music and piano and voice and guitar and everything as she was in the womb. But now, you know, she's learning just incidentally because of having fun. And, you know, we both read to her a lot too, and now she's already at 16 months old. I'll open up a book and she'll point to it, and then she'll start saying gibberish, right? She's not really,
trying.
she's mimicking, so she sees me open a book, and I'll point at the words, and we'll go, and I'll read it, and now she's starting to open the book and kind of just, she's starting to gather in her mind that there's a concept behind the
What's on the
visual
page. Yeah.
thing that's there.
Yeah.
And she's starting to kind of mimic. So she'll do that. I guarantee that girl is going to be reading by the time she's 3 years old. I guarantee it. Through nothing more than me and her mother just reading her stories, you know?
That's
Especially
awesome.
before
That's
bed.
absolutely awesome.
I mean, during the day, she'll pick up books and bring them to us and sit in our lap. And then, you know what, a lot of times, you know, she's only 16 months old, I'll get a few pages into the book, and then she wants to do something else. So do you think I grab her and sit her down and be like, no, we're reading the book? No. I put it down,
she's done. She's
and then
done,
we
yeah.
start playing. You know, you don't force things on them. If you don't force it, then they're going to be more apt to learn, because you're not forcing things on them. So now when I pick up a book, and she's only started this in probably the past, you know, month or so, where she'll start, like I said, mimicking like what we're doing, you know, pointing to the words. She won't say a word really, but she'll just kind of do baby talk and point at it, like pretending like she's mom and dad. And because of that, she's going to be able to read. And because of just giving her the little, even not just on the steps on the playground, but and when we play with stuff, a lot of times I'm like, here's 1, 2, 3, 4. And sometimes she'll say 1, 2, 3. Sometimes she just goes back, you know. But she's already learning, so she's learning
Developing
math. So-
patterns and rhythms. But then the other thing you kind of touched on was the length of time they want to learn. I've learned that long-term memory retention happens when you learn in shorter bursts. And that's probably more true for most people. Not everyone can learn in these long, hour-long classroom sessions. But if you're doing more like 5-minute bursts, your long-term memory and retention tends to be better overall.
Bottom line is everyone learns different.
True.
And forcing people to learn doesn't work.
Yeah, the way we currently do things is very inefficient because it's kind of a one-size-fits-all method, and it's just very inefficient learning. I think there's better ways, and I think both of our ideas, I think, have a lot of validity too. And man, your kid's going to be way ahead of the curve starting her out that early and you think you're doing an amazing job.
Yeah, and she's going to be homeschooled. I mean,
My two knuckleheads, I got to apologize for it ahead of time because.
Well, my son was raised in the public school system. My daughter will not be. She's not going to public school, and I've already been researching play groups and stuff for her. You know, now she's getting to the point where she might be able to start participating in that kind of stuff because she can walk, and
I can imagine she's probably going to be around here too. We'll probably see her running around.
she already has been quite a bit. I mean, there's a pile of little blocks over there. We were just counting those yesterday.
All right.
You know, but and the thing is, I'm never going to force anything on her. And for most people, think about in your day-to-day life, most people don't really use much other than basic arithmetic. I know as a chef, I use fractions quite a bit. Right? And then construction workers, I have a lot of friends who are in construction, they use a fair amount of geometry. They need to figure out area, and they need to understand the basics of geometry and stuff like that. But there are people who don't need to know that stuff. And do you think that those construction workers really learned that in school? Or did they learn it from their mentor who was teaching them on the job?
Yeah.
They taught them the skills that they need to be able to do it, you know, to be able to learn how to use a compass, or, you know, use a right angle, you know, to figure out angles and stuff like that.
That was a key for me, was learning, especially with mathematics. It's like I was pretty good at it, but when you showed me if I could figure something out and apply it, oh, now I got it, and I learned it really fast, and of course, it was interesting at that point. So you can learn, you can learn a useful skill out of that, and then you can take and apply it, and then you got it. And that's a lot of what you get with apprenticeships, right? But I think, fundamentals, you need to know practically. I think mathematics-wise, I think everyone, in my opinion, should know at least up to basic algebra.
Basic algebra, yeah,
And I think
exactly.
that's because it's a useful skill. People are like, what do you need letters for? Well, what you need to understand is variables. Every time you throw a variable in the equation, the outcome changes dramatically. And that's kind of what the tricks of when people get tripped up on science and stuff like that. It's like, well, science is this. Well, if you get some of those variables wrong, it skews the answer. And sometimes there's some misleading stuff in there. And but that gets more into
I don't think
mainstream stuff that's getting pushed out to us. But
well, when it comes to all the way up to basic algebra, I completely agree with that. And there's pretty much, at least in the circles that I run in, any parent can teach up to basic algebra, right?
most, yes.
So, X, minus 12 equals, whatever, then you're going to be able to solve for X, right? It's not that difficult of a concept to be able to figure out, to balance equations and stuff. Once you get up into trig and calculus and stuff like that, the vast majority of people don't need that.
No.
It's only the engineers, the 1% to 2% of people who want to be able to design products and stuff. But there's lots of other intellectual pursuits outside of engineering as well.
Excuse me.
And a lot of engineers are really just like you were. They don't really want to learn history because they're interested in how applied physics works, right? And that's where they get off. They like that, So why force them to sit through some history class? Not to mention the fact that the history that they're going to learn in public school, and probably most private schools too, is absolute nonsense. They're going to come out of it with a completely skewed view of what history is.
It's vaguely political. It's just really general.
I think it's extremely political.
And I think the most interesting things about history they don't teach. I mean, just like, what was a lifestyle like? And that way, if you learn what a lifestyle was like on a frontier, you would have a greater appreciation for what's in front of you. I mean, just the food you get, right? I mean, where did that food come from? And going back to what children should learn, in my opinion, is throw a garden out there at the school, and have the kids plant the seeds and grow the stuff. And I've done that with my kids, and I've had them, we grow food, and we get to see where the food comes from.
My parents do the same thing.
I've done as much as create a box that had glass sides, and you can see, pretty much deep into the soil, and you can see the roots go down into the soil and stuff like that. But understand where it comes from. That way you're just not an entitled little bitch running around and saying, I need this, and that. But
but they didn't even need school for that, you see? You did it with them. They didn't need school for that.
But I think one pitfall of learning at home is looking at the bell curve, right? I mean, think of what George Carlin always says about the average person. He goes, think about how dumb that person is. And half the population is dumber than that.
Well, perhaps, but the thing is that with that, a lot of it, I think the biggest problem with that comes down to the parenting itself, not necessarily the intelligence of the child. I think that
you don't necessarily
a lot of people struggle, right? Financially, maybe they didn't have the best childhood. I was blessed with a very good childhood, 2 parents that stayed together, and they did the kind of things with me that you need to do. But it wouldn't matter, even if I had a lower IQ, that basic stuff should be easily accessible to people. But it's just a matter of even if the parents are good, a lot of times they just don't have time. Because just the way the world is, the way the world works now, you really need to have at least one parent at home. If the kids are constantly being shipped here and there and dropped off and doing this and that, it's not conducive to them being able to learn from their parents. Their parents are too absorbed with making money, and then the parents just put that off onto the school system. And the school system is designed to create basically automatons. They're trying to create cogs.
You show up to work on time. Can you push the button and do that the right way?
Do exactly what you're told.
Yeah, do exactly what you're told.
Think exactly how you're told to
You don't
think.
even need to think in most cases. but
No,
yeah.
you automatically, you're like, well, you default to experts. That's what the teacher teaches you, is to default to an expert. You don't
So,
question authority.
It's even disappearing from colleges these days, is really good philosophical teachings. Where's that going? I mean, I love going back to Socrates. It's another thing that I learned very late in life. It's like, yeah, why wasn't this stuff taught earlier? It's like, I've always been a type of person to question things. When I learned about Socrates, it's basically his whole shtick is, I know nothing, so I'm going to continue to ask you questions until you either run out of your knowledge or you get frustrated and pissed off, and then I'm going to find the limitations of your knowledge. And it's a very useful skill, and I've been able to apply that many times more recently and in more recent world events and stuff. And you get to find these authoritarian types. You start to ask them questions, and they immediately start getting upset. It's like, well, you honestly don't know what the hell you're talking about if you're getting upset over something.
I do think the Socratic method is useful. Although, I mean, I do have some qualms with Plato in general, because obviously Socrates himself didn't write anything. So basically what we know about
Most
Socrates,
of it comes from Plato, yeah.
Plato and Xenophon, and there were some other writers that Aristophanes that did write. I mean, Aristophanes is highly critical. I would actually say, the point when I was saying I physically dropped out at 15 and then I mentally dropped out probably around 12, was actually when I read the Socratic dialogues. That for me was
I'm a late bloomer.
the point in which I couldn't deal with school anymore. Because I was interested in, when I found out in elementary school about Greek culture and philosophy, I was very interested in it, right? And they would brush over it in class, but I was like, well, I want to read it.
Yeah, and you learn nothing about it. I mean, just kind of know who a person is.
You learn it's absolute garbage. You don't learn anything. You have to read it.
Yeah.
You can't even if you get into high school or college level classes where you're reading a book by a third party who's interpreted it, is worthless. I mean, maybe I shouldn't say worthless, because I mean, Bertrand Russell particularly in his book The History of Western Philosophy helped me to understand better. So when I first read the Socratic dialogues, particularly the Republic, I think I didn't quite grasp it, but after reading Bertrand Russell, I started to understand what Plato was talking about more, and that's where a lot of my actual
That's something I need to fill in, but no,
Bertrand Russell.
Yeah.
Well, Bertrand Russell was one of the most prominent philosophers of the 20th century. His book Power had a huge influence on me. History of Western Philosophy. On both sides of his family, I believe it was his grandfather on one side and his great-grandfather on another were prime ministers of Great Britain. He was from a very prominent oligarch family. He was mostly a mathematician, but he had a lot of, I'd say his main influence on the modern world is through philosophy. And as far as classical philosophy goes, his book, The History of Western Philosophy, really was able to, it helped me to comprehend what was going on back in, I probably read that when I was in my early 20s, I would say. And then I went back to read the Socratic dialogues after reading Bertrand Russell.
You're able to gain more knowledge or gain more understanding.
Well, Bertrand Russell, I mean, I'd say most people probably wouldn't agree with me on this, but he was a psychopath, and so was Plato. And he's very frank with this stuff. I mean, the Republic was basically a blueprint for an autocratic society. Complete with slaves and everything. I mean, it wasn't a republic like we think of it today. Mm-hmm. In fact, Plato and Socrates, they and their families back in Athens revered the Spartans. I think they probably had a lot to do actually with the usurpation of the Athenian democracy when they brought in when Sparta took over and brought in the 30 tyrants. A lot of Socrates' relatives were in league with that stuff, and I think a lot of the reasons Socrates was executed was because of that. I mean, Plato tries to play up a lot the denying the gods type stuff, but the corrupting the youth stuff was, I think from what I can see, I think that was probably something that was more significant. It's hard to know what Socrates actually thought because he didn't write anything. He was an orator, right? We have to absorb it through third parties. So I usually refer to Plato rather than Socrates because normally you're referring to Socrates through the lens of Plato.
Right, and Socrates is often thought of as a character more than an actual person in those dialogues.
And who knows? He might be. He was a character. Yeah. I mean, he definitely was. I mean, there
could be based on true events. But there's always some embellishments. Yeah. Well, wow, philosophy and education. That's one I really like. But I think we're going to take a quick break here. Just about done with my beer, and we're going to come back. And I want to get to libertarianism now because that's one that you really taught me a lot about. And I know we've been going on and on about education, and it's a good subject. And if we want to fill another podcast with that all in one day, we can do that too.
I am very enthusiastic about talking about libertarianism.
All right, so this is kind of Pub Wisdom's introduction to Chad, and I've been hoping for you to be one of my regulars, or regulars, and we'll get to that. And I know once you get this business rolling, I think you'll have maybe a little bit more time for this on the side, but we'll see. So we'll be right back, and we'll talk about libertarianism.
This is Sparta!
I eat Sparta for dessert.
From our nation's capital, a group of Alzheimer's disease sufferers marched on Washington today demanding a cure for pancakes.
Until this tea kettle is cured, there will never be enough bread in the laundry.
Ding dong! Karate! Get hell hurt!
Back at the Bistro for Pub Wisdom, and
Cheers.
Chad, you're going to enlighten me on libertarianism.
Right. So
I know it's a favorite subject of yours.
Yeah. Yes, it is. I would actually not consider myself a libertarian. If you were to ask me what my true philosophy is, and how I live my life and how I think other people should live their life, it would be voluntarism. Voluntarism.
So let me stop you right there before, just to kind of back up. So a lot of people think along the political spectrum of conservative or liberal, and that's a linear line. Libertarianism is kind of more two-dimensional, three-dimensional space. And, so we're kind of like in the middle, but we're kind of north or south of.
Yeah, well, right. And you know what? I wouldn't even consider it in the middle necessarily. What I would say is, so yes, you do have what in mainstream politics today, conservatism and liberalism, right? So conservatives want to give you economic freedom, and they want to have moral tyranny. Liberals want to have economic tyranny, and they want to give you moral freedom, right? Mm-hmm. What a libertarian would be is, or really, if you look at the graph, right? So you have the X and Y axis, and you put on the horizontal conservative liberal. At the top, you're going to have anarchy, right? And anarchists want to give you total freedom, economic, moral, whatever you want to do. And at the bottom of the x-axis, right, or the y-axis, I guess, then you're going to have statism. And they want to dictate all your morals and all of your economics, right? So
I'm shaking my head no because I'm not a part of that.
yeah, well, most people would not profess to be statists, right? They're usually conservative or liberal. They're rarely anarchist or statist. A libertarian is going to be going up the y-axis, not quite to anarchy. A libertarian is a minarchist. Basically, they think that you need a small state, right? So minarchy literally means small rulers, right? So if you're
Small government rule, and also
well, etymologically, this is where it's important to get into definitions, right? So anarchy literally means no archons. An archon, typically today, it would mean no ruler. Okay, and the root of the word archon comes from Athens, where they had a triumvirate of kings that were called archons, right? They had one that controlled war, one that controlled the judiciary, and one that controlled the politics. Okay, and that's where that word is derived from.
we're getting a little smarter here.
Today, basically you could say that it means no ruler, right? So archon basically is a synonym for ruler. With a minarchist, which would be like a libertarian, they believe in having some type of social contract, right? With a voluntarist could be anything. A voluntarist could even be a statist, because the only prerequisite is that it's voluntary. So if you wanted to voluntarily associate yourself with a fascist state, where they said they would, murder you if you stole a paperclip, if that's what you want, then sure, go for it. I'm not going to try to stop you. Okay, and it's not very conducive to the modern nation-state system. In a truly voluntarist system, I think the states would have to be much smaller, and they would be private. As far as anarchy goes, anarchy, if you take it its literal definition of no ruler, right, no governorship whatsoever, it's hard to imagine that would really work. You need some kind of a social contract. It would work in a very rural area, I suppose, where you didn't have any shared spaces whatsoever. But if you're going to have shared spaces, you need some kind of a social contract, right? And there has to be rules that go along with that. And anarchy doesn't mean no rules. It just means no rulers. Okay, so
Not like the old punk rock anarchy. No.
well, and there are different branches of anarchy as well. So you have the anarcho-communists, okay, and that's the kind of classical, what people think of as an anarchist. They're the people who want to tear down government, but they don't really have any solution for it, right? They just want to burn things down.
Yeah.
It's like the Antifa type, right? And then you have the anarcho-capitalists, the ANCAPs. That's closer to what I am, and that's what libertarians in general are. A lot of times you'll see libertarians using those terms interchangeably depending on who they're talking to, and I do that as well. I don't always want to explain voluntarism to people, like in conversation, because
it kind of sounds self-explanatory, just being voluntary.
well, the core principle of all anarcho-libertarianism is what's called the NAP, which is the non-aggression principle. It means that you should not harm other people, right? Do what you want as long as it doesn't harm someone else. Okay, so
I've heard that very same term referred to from like a Wiccan. They were kind of like, yeah, do as you will, harm no one kind of thing.
Satanism has taken that over. They say, do what thou wilt, right? And that was, Anton LaVey. But with as far as the Satanists go, it's sort of unnecessary. Like, it's just kind of it's really a kind of sophomoric philosophy, because all they do is they take libertarianism and they slap atheism on top of it, and they kind of pretend it's a new philosophy. Really, libertarianism, anarchism has nothing to do with atheism. You can be an atheist and be an anarchist, and you could be religious and be an anarchist or libertarian. It doesn't really matter.
But many people try to tag atheism to certain things. It's kind of just an individual that doesn't believe in theism, and that's kind of really all it is. It's really nothing else. But yeah, you're trying to label it and pair it with other things, and it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, well, they don't have anything to do with each other. So, I mean, like the base level Satanism, kind of like the Anton LaVey type satanic Bible Satanism, they don't really believe in God or whatever, and they're anti-Christians, and they sort of have a libertarian mindset, but I don't identify with them whatsoever. I actually believe in creation, but I mean, we don't even need to get into that right now. As far as anarcho-libertarianism, trying to educate, your viewers on this, you have a sort of a spectrum there, from the libertarians who are minarchists all the way to the anarchists who just don't believe that there should really be a social contract. And some people who would describe themselves as anarchists probably would want to have a social contract, right? Something that, if you're going to have shared spaces, you have to have some kind of a rule set for it, right? I mean, you're not going to be able to maintain them and have social order without something there. What voluntarism is all about is letting people do what they want, right? As long as it doesn't harm other people.
Right.
Now, if you were to sign a contract, like I said, to go into some kind of a totalitarian state, that's on you, if that's what you want to do. I think very few people would do that. I think the most successful states would probably be minarchist, right? So I think there needs to be there's something to be said for having like building code standards, right? You don't want to just, especially in a city situation where your buildings are right next to each other, you don't want people putting in shoddy electricity and burning your building down.
Not just the building, but all the buildings next to it, like you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah, tight communities do need a little bit more regulation, yeah.
Right, so a pure anarchy, like literally the definition of no rulers, right? It's hard to say, it's hard to imagine how that would really work, but if you have other than in maybe a very rural area where you don't have shared spaces, it may work there, and that might be what some people need because they don't want any rules whatsoever. In a voluntarist society, I think what you would end up having, instead of having these warring nation states, which we've had for thousands of years now, I think you'd end up with a patchwork of city-states that probably have some kind of an urban area, but then also have a rural agricultural area around it. Probably. I mean, I think. I don't know for sure, but I would say that that's likely to be what the case would be if we didn't have our modern psychopathic system. Right now, you're forced into, wherever you're born, you have a gun to your head, right? Even for the slightest infraction, having a tail light out. If you don't comply, right, if you have a tail light out and you never agreed to these laws to begin with, and you get pulled over, they'll just give you a fix-it ticket. But if you don't fix it and you let it go, they'll put a bench warrant out for you. And if you get caught, the police officer will attempt to throw you in a cage, right? They'll try to kidnap you, and they'll try to throw you in a cage, and if you try to defend yourself, they'll kill you.
All for what? A light bulb? I mean, yeah.
And it doesn't matter. I'm picking that out as being that's like the extreme example, but that's where you're at. If you don't fix that and pay them, ultimately, if you were to try to resist them kidnapping you and throwing you in a cage, they would kill you. So everything
that is a possibility.
It is. I mean, that's the reality. That's just the reality of the situation. They will not stop until you comply. And if you don't comply, ultimately, you will die. That type of coercive government is really, I think, the problem with society today. I think we've never known true freedom. And again, with voluntarism,
We've never known true freedom like our generation, and probably several generations, honestly, have never known true freedom.
I don't know if anyone has. I think in the American frontier,
Probably the earliest days of the settling of this country, we maybe saw some of that, yeah.
you did see a sort of default voluntarism, because people were like, well, I want to leave whatever country I was in, right? It started with England, and they wanted religious freedom, so they would come here. And then the frontier kept expanding out. So the people who really didn't want to live in this coercive state could keep moving into the frontier. It's a very unique situation, though. I don't think that in the history of mankind you've seen anything quite like that. And what did it produce? It produced the freest, most prosperous society in history, right? I mean, the modern world, a lot of those advancements came from people who were in that community. Obviously, you do have issues with the fact that, the Native Americans and things that happened there, but for the most part, they were, by default, living in a voluntarist type society until the civilization just kind of took over, right? They kept having to move further and further out, eventually filled the whole continent. And
It's almost like urban sprawl we see here, right? I mean, Detroit things kind of started moving north and out in all directions, north and west, and even up here where we're at in Rochester Hills, this used to be up north for people, right? And then things kept pushing further and further, and this is kind of now very city-like. Suburbia, but still they're city-like, yeah. And it's kind of a natural progression where civilization just keeps moving and taking over and expanding and growing, and then more rules and regulations come in because the population density is so high and people running into each other, and it kind of makes a lot of sense.
And as you get more population density, you probably need more rules. And I do think a lot of anarchists don't necessarily get that because they're so individualistic. I mean, I think a lot of the anarchists that I know and I've met over the years, they have a hard time even having a job because they don't want a boss to tell them what to do. But this is why voluntarism is so beautiful, because in a job in the free market is voluntary, right? You shouldn't really hate your boss, because ultimately you can leave. Like, you're not a slave, right? And yeah, it might take some time, but people who get a job and then just don't want to follow the rules because they don't like listening to anyone, what's the point, right? I mean, why did you even get the job to begin with? It's completely voluntary. You never had to do it. And I think that society could be built on voluntarism. Getting there is a little bit complicated in the situation that we're in right now because there are so many psychopaths and there's been so much war, right? And war creates psychopaths.
It's often created by psychopaths too.
It's created by them, but if you have to live through a war, I mean, imagine being, in Iraq during the Second Gulf War, for instance. You've just lived through a decade of an embargo where I think 1 million Iraqis starved to death. Okay, right, a lot of people, right, and then all of a sudden you're getting bombed. I mean, if you're a little kid, think about being 2, 3, 4 years old and there's bombs going off and your neighbors are dying and there's houses being blown up and that kind of stuff. You can't develop naturally. And so this system that we've had of constant warfare for centuries and millennia is not conducive to having a healthy society. It just isn't, right? So we live in a dangerous world now because so many people have been so damaged by having really damaged childhoods because of war and poverty. And I think that does pose problems for transitioning to a voluntarist world. We probably need to have steps in between. But I think ultimately,
a lot of what you hear about libertarianism in general is we don't want to foreign affairs. We don't want any of that. We want to focus on what we have here. We want to butt out of foreign affairs, right? So I mean, pulling out of these foreign countries, in my opinion, is like, why the hell are we over there anyway? I mean, why are we going into wars, and why are we doing all this stuff, and why are we harming so many people and fucking with so many other countries and regime changes and things like that? Why are we doing that?
Yes, I mean,
There's nothing here going on here that I could see why we're doing anything over there. Other
Certainly.
than maybe you want cheaper clothes, because it seems like after we go into a war, we decimate a country, we rebuild it, and now we're getting cheap shit from there. We're getting clothes from Vietnam, right? So I mean, you can go backwards in time, and we used to get cheap stuff from Japan. We used to everybody we've been in war with, we've later get cheap goods from them. Like, we don't need that. We don't need all the things we're getting for so cheap. And
well, as far as libertarian minarchism goes, which is the right direction, which is where we need to go, absolutely, interfering in the internal politics of other people's countries is a terrible idea. It only leads to detrimental situations. There's the concept of blowback, where you're trying to supposedly do good, and then you create terrorists because you kill their family, and then they go insane. Because imagine having your family killed, as a little kid. I mean, you're much more likely to become a terrorist. You're much more likely to not.
Revenge, right? I mean, that's an age-old story.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yes, I mean, not interfering. This is sort of Ron Paul. Ron Paul was like the archetypal minarchist, right? He believed in a constitutional government. He believed in the republic. He thought we should have, to a certain extent, he believes we should have a coercive state. And this is where I sort of disagree with him a little bit, is I'm not really minarchist when it comes to a coercive state. I am a minarchist in terms of, I think that if I want to have a society, a town, a city, something like that, I do believe we need a social contract. I think it should be as minimal as possible to just cover the basics and then let people's freedom expand from there, which is why I consider myself a voluntarist as opposed to an anarchist. But if you want to look at practicality, we're very far from that. And a non-aggression principle applied to geopolitics would do a lot for us and for the world because of exactly what you're saying. I mean, you don't want to get involved in the internal affairs of other countries. I mean, what is it to you? I mean, why make enemies there?
It's nothing. It should be nothing, in my opinion. But yeah, continue, because I had a thought, but it got broken up. But go ahead.
Well, it would have served us well. I mean, if you see a lot, the problems geopolitically, the problems of the 20th century came from the aftermath of World War I and the Balfour Declaration, where they set the borders of the Balkan states, the Middle Eastern states, and in these regions where they sort of divided them up and created these artificial polities, you saw just nonstop warfare, right? And these are the problem areas now. And later in the 20th century, and really, well, actually, pretty much at that same time, in Central America was covered with corporatist fascist states. The Union Fruit Corporation, and there were other ones.
History.
And it's sort of it
History
doesn't.
we're not taught in schools, but yeah.
Right. So I mean, in Central America, there is what I would call corporate fascism, where corporations, for all intents and purposes, had taken over the countries. They clear-cut them. It's where the term banana republic comes from, where they sort of clear-cut it, enslaved the people to work on farms to send fruit out. So this corporation, Union Fruit, sounds kind of innocuous and harmless. Well, it was a very harmful company. And on occasion, the people in Central America would rebel, and then the United States government, even in the early 20th century, would send troops in to quell the rebellions. I think the United States actually has invaded Honduras, I think 6 times between 1911 and 1930 something.
Know about that, folks?
And what they were doing is not just for Union Fruit. There were actually a few corporations that were doing this, but they were intervening on the behalf of them, right? And that created a lot of the problems that we have today. In fact, our illegal immigration problem is directly from that, because what happened was the people were like, oh, okay, well, this is capitalism. I don't like capitalism, so where are they going to go? Well, they're provided with their alternative is communism, right? Little did they know that communism, Bolshevism, was actually funded by Western capitalists. But they're like, well, if this is capitalism, then I'm going to be a communist. And that just gave the U.S. government carte blanche to kill everyone, right? And, they created the narco states and everything there. And it's that kind of interventionalism that really has destroyed the world. It's made it very dangerous, right?
Playing both sides of the coin, making and demonizing one side and saying we got to go and take that one out. It's like you created it, and then now we got to go fix it. And it's endless cycle. It seems like,
and they're not fixing anything. I mean, they're destroying.
They're continuing the cycle. Honestly, it's a cycle, right? They'll go and stomp it out, and then through virtue of what they're doing, we'll create it yet again, and then we'll go in and stomp it out yet again. And it's just, it doesn't sound like a sustainable cycle, honestly.
Well, long term, it's not sustainable, but it serves their purposes in the short term because they were able to use parts of the Middle East and Central America to run huge amounts of drugs into the United States, right? So the narco states there that were set up to supposedly to oppose communism, which is ridiculous, to say that that's why they did it, but supposedly that's why they did it, right? And they've created it's basically a hellscape. I mean, living in Central America in the 20th century was a living hell. And now we're at a point where the people there are severely damaged. And a lot of people are fleeing. And it's the same thing in the Middle East. They're fleeing the Middle East as well, and they're fleeing into Europe. And a lot of conservatives want to criticize this and say, well, there's a lot of them are criminals and things like that. And perhaps they are. But now it's too late to stop it.
And I would imagine it's probably not all of them, but yet they've created a system that harbors them. And
they've messed people up.
Yeah.
If your parents were killed, or you lived, even if they weren't, if you lived through a war where you saw people dying and you're terrified and bombs are going
certainly
off.
Would change you for sure.
Right. So you
not
can't.
For the best.
You may not empathize with other people. It can create sociopathy, and I think it has. And then now you're seeing these people, they're being allowed to flood into Europe, into America, and it's going to change the culture, right? I'm not a borders person. I don't really particularly myself like borders, but we're in such a dangerous world right now because of everything that's going on, because of the foreign policy of the past, that you can't deny that when these third world countries are mass migrating into what we call first world countries, that's going to change the culture and that it's going to have huge effects.
Certainly will, yeah.
And now we can't change it though. Now we're pretty much set on our path. I mean, you had to in the past not allow the things, not allow the Balfour Declaration, not allow the narco states. But by and large, people supported it, in the United States. I mean, Reagan, he certainly had his critics, but now he's basically deified.
Well,
and the Reagan administration is where you saw a lot of the Central American anti-communism stuff, and a lot of it was death squads. I mean, the School of America, they used American Special Forces to train local people to create what they called anti-communist forces that were essentially death squads, right? And if you live in those type of circumstances, you can't have a normal life, right? You can't just, we're entertained. We've bread and circuses here, right?
Oh yeah.
We've got Cedar Point and Disneyland and birthdays and Christmas and everything that we're used to on a daily basis.
You got the Kardashians too. I mean,
exactly.
All distractions, smoke and mirrors, folks. Smoke and mirrors.
And
never mind what's going on behind the curtain.
And and if you're in that kind of a situation and you can't look past it to try and put some pressure on your political leaders to not do these types of things, because really the political leaders are criminals. I mean, they're profiting on this stuff, and they know they are. They try and portray an image of righteousness, but they aren't in any way.
It seems to be something that's getting more and more clear now, and I think at least one of the good things we're getting out of the information age, that we're now seeing that where It's like, how are our politicians getting so rich, right? I mean, they're on the inside of things, right? They know what's going on, they know what's going to happen before, and a lot of times they're paid off by people too. So it seems like if we could track the money and we can follow the money and we can.
A lot of it's not traceable. I mean, and that's why they set up the narco states. I mean, the CIA, a lot of what they're funding for black ops comes from is through running drugs and human trafficking and weapons trafficking, and it's off the book stuff. They've been doing it for a long time, and it's basically ruined the world. That's why I say, like, you can't even solve the immigration problem at this point. Because if you try to reject these people, what's their life going to be like? You know, most of the illegal immigrants, so-called illegal, I don't really like that term, but the people that are coming across the border now are coming from Central America, and they're coming from a political situation that we could have not caused. Right? We caused it. I don't want to even say we. I don't like that either because I had nothing to do with it.
True. However, we are supposed to be we the people, but that's technically not true anymore. But
my parents and grandparents should not have supported it. My parents and grandparents are huge Reagan supporters. I guarantee.
I'm sure they were subject to the propaganda at the time.
Exactly,
right? So they thought it was a good thing, so they were in support of it.
Yeah.
Because that's what they were told.
They loved Reagan. Like I said, the first book I read was a biography of Ronald Reagan.
He's a very popular president, too.
Well,
I'm old enough to remember him, to put an age on me,
he
but
was
yeah.
popular at first. His popularity waned towards the end, but now he's deified. He's super popular, right? Reagan to the conservatives is sort of he's a deity.
He's one of the last great Republicans.
But then you look at his policies, right? And the Reagan administration exploded the debt, the United States budget, right? And he came into office saying he was going to get rid of the Department of Education, all this other stuff. But during the Reagan administration is when you saw all of this so-called counter-communist action in Central America that created the narco states, that created the horrible living conditions that now is it's precipitated the current events of now. And how can you stop it? Are you going to tell these people who've went on foot from Central America all the way through Mexico to come into the United States that they can't? I mean, I suppose you could, and a lot of people don't want to let them in, but I mean, this is a very, very difficult situation morally, I mean, and people don't want to acknowledge that, they're just like, oh, they want to come here for our welfare and whatnot, and they're just a bunch of lazy people, or, oh, well, if our country's so bad, why do they all want to come here? Well, it's because their lives were living hell for generations.
They were destroyed. But so, okay, we've wandered far from libertarianism to some foreign policies, but this kind of brings the question that I have. Someone like you're obviously well-read, well understood on these types of things. I don't know anything about this. If I listen to the mainstream media, I'm not going to just some of them will acknowledge there's people coming across the border. Others will say, no, there's no problem, nothing to see here. I'm like, but yet there is an issue. We've seen people. Elon Musk has kept Twitter a relatively free speech kind of thing. He himself has gone down there, people pouring through the border. Seen Robert F. Kennedy go down there, people pouring through the border. So this is happening, and we can go down and see it, and we're looking for citizen journalists to go down and do that, and just go out there. Everyone's got a camera on their phone. Go out there, record this stuff. We see it. Well, but where are you getting your information? Where did you learn this kind of stuff that you're talking about? I mean, where does it come from? I mean, because it's not coming from any type of mainstream news source that I've ever heard of. I mean, I do my best to unplug from it to keep my brain healthy, but
you won't. And I mean, if you're talking about like mainstream media as in like cable news or reading the New York Times or something like that, yeah, you're not going to hear it. But I mean, this is historical fact. I mean, just Google search School of the Americas, right? Or Union Fruit. I mean, this stuff is very well known. I mean, if you just look into the history of El
So
Salvador.
you're saying it's all out there, it's all documented, you just got to search it up.
And people don't,
You've had a
people by and
curiosity
large
about this.
don't. They just don't, even in this
No.
information age. And that's why it's kind of useless, because more people do get propaganda than they get real information.
And then on top of that, it's a headline reader kind of thing. You read a headline, you think you got it all, you're moving on, even though what's under the headline can be drastically different than what's... The headline is basically the old form of clickbait, right? And that's kind of what clickbait does too. And it says, this sensationalized that, and then, or this beats that, or this obliterates that, and it's, oh, okay, got a headline, moving on, and this good, this bad, moving on. But there's no substance there, you're not learning anything. When you go in detail and you talk to someone that knows some great detail about it, you start to learn something. And it gives you an opportunity to question, is this right? How do you know this? Or
Well, everything that I've been saying is just in the historical record. I mean, I wouldn't consider Wikipedia to be a bastion of truth, but there are certain things that they're right on that are part of the historical record.
For me, that's been a good starting point. Start with Wikipedia, and it might point you in the right direction.
And if anyone watching this wants to understand this, just go into Wikipedia and look up the history of Honduras. It'll say right there. It's not like it's conspiracy, it's not hidden. There are conspiratorial things that are attached to it. Certainly, the United States government is not going to admit to being complicit in drug running, right? They're not going to admit that, the Bush family was running cocaine.
We had a war on drugs, didn't we?
The Zapata Oil Company, because they want to tell you that the Bushes are like oil barons. They never made any money in oil. Never did. They were weapons manufacturers. They owned Smith & Wesson, actually, and they were in the railroad business. Zapata Oil, which was George Bush's oil company, it was they had oil rigs off the coast of Nicaragua, and there isn't very much oil there, but there is a lot of cocaine. Okay, so they would set up these shell companies, and of course they're not going to admit to it, but it's been revealed. I mean, Gary Webb was a journalist that you would want to look into. I mean, he was murdered.
Boy, that oil looks very powdery.
Yeah. No, well, and they'll say, I mean, it was supposedly a failure of a business, and at that point, George Bush technically wasn't working for the CIA. I think he actually was, but they create front businesses and they gaslight. I mean, they're going to say that they're not doing it, but again, you look into Gary Webb. I mean, everyone knows at this point the Iran-Contra almost blew it completely apart. I mean, they basically had to admit that they were dealing drugs and dealing weapons, right? But the problem, I think the real problem is that people don't care. And at this point, what are you even going to do about it? In the past, you probably could have done something about it, with illegal immigration, so-called, and the drug running but at this point, it's so far along, I don't see how there's really a good solution. Because borders aren't a good solution, because you're telling people, you're holding a gun to their head and saying you can't come across this line. I don't think that's morally right. Okay, and
That's a tough one. Yeah.
I mean, look, Mexico, and prior to the Mexican-American War, comprised everything we see in Mexico today, and Texas, and New Mexico, and Arizona, and Southern California. I mean, it was a huge country. It was taken by force, just by coercion. So who's to say those people can't come across the border? And I understand people's argument that a lot of these people are criminals, or they might be coming to get welfare or whatever. I don't really think welfare is the main thing, but I mean, if you look at their situation, if we wanted to stop it, you had to stop it when Reagan was doing it, or you had to stop it in the early 20th century, right? It was our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, but they didn't. They didn't care. So now,
Wasn't a problem.
what is the situation that we're in? They should have stood up then and said, no, we're not going to murder people. we're not going to install corporate fascism, and then we're not going to install narco states.
Right.
But people don't care because they have bread and circuses. Who cares? To the average American that grows up with birthday parties and Disney World,
Super Bowl,
and exactly. I mean, what are you thinking about? Wouldn't it be nice if you were born in Iraq to be thinking about the Super Bowl, right?
Yeah, if people spent enough time studying the government and what we do as much as they do what top athletes' stats are every year, or fantasy football or whatever, it's like they spent that kind of time on that type of thing, how much more would they know versus, watching sports is entertaining, but it's ultimately useless.
Yeah, but people are dying.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that if you're in these situations, you have to empathize with these people, and most people don't.
Yeah.
And if you were just to...
Can empathy be taught? I think
it doesn't need to be taught. Empathy is automatic. Empathy has to be beaten out of people.
Unless you're seeing people die around you, right? Which is kind of the opposite, which is what we're causing in other areas, right?
I think if the average American, Jane Champagne and Joe Sixpack would go to spend a week in one of these war zones, they would be in tears.
Forever changed.
Would you ever? Yeah. Have you watched any videos online? I'm sure a lot of people have, but of mothers crying of their dying kids, right? This kind of stuff. It's not. The average American, if they were confronted with it, would absolutely have a big problem with it. But the thing is that they're just absorbed in their life, which is just a bunch of entertainment, and they don't understand that this is, it's causing huge problems. And this does directly tie into libertarianism as well, because this is the main point of libertarianism, is to end psychopathy, to end sociopathy. The non-aggression principle, which is what libertarians, anarchists, voluntarists try to follow. It's not perfect. You're never going to be able to be perfect with never aggressing against another person, but it's sort of an ideal. That's the key to not doing this kind of stuff. If you want to affect change in the world, then this is kind of what we have to do. We have to admit that this kind of stuff happened too.
Yeah, we got to be honest with ourselves. We're all part of it. Yeah.
But they're just, conservatives today, they hate illegal immigration, right? They're so-called illegal immigration. Well, where were you in the Reagan administration? Why weren't you out in the streets protesting the narco states that were set up, that caused the chaos, that made people go crazy, and have these terrible countries and these governments that are just, they're maniacal. And where were our great-grandparents in the early 1900s protesting against Union fruit and the United States interventions in Honduras?
I can tell you from living through it, they were well-fed and they were unaware, and they were misled by the media.
Yeah.
Because everything was hunky-dory in those days around here. We were perfect. Are you kidding me? We go out in the rest of the world, and we're so highly regarded because we're so good, and we go out and rescue everyone. No, that's the way we thought. We had no idea. We had no idea.
And and that's no excuse.
And we couldn't search it up. There was no Google, no Wikipedia. There's no way to search things up at that point.
Educate yourself. It's logical. If you don't understand,
maybe some of that stuff is at a library. I don't know,
it's not. Yeah, but how would we allow? Like I said, Honduras was invaded by the United States 6 times between 1911 and I want to say in the early 30s. I don't remember the exact dates. 6 times, right? Because the people were rebelling against corporate fascism. Why would that be allowed? How are people not up in arms about that? Yeah. Because you're right, they don't know, but inform yourself. The situation we're in right now, that is because people are lazy and entertained. They don't want to admit the truth.
And they want cheap shit too.
Well, then all I'm saying is if you're a conservative right now, don't sit there crying about South Americans coming across the border. You need to admit that you're guilty of creating the situation that caused their lives to be a living hell, right? What would you do if you were in a situation where people were killing you, right? There were death squads, the School of the Americas. This is in the 80s. Like, what were you doing in the 80s? I mean, I was a little kid, right? But I mean,
a little myself.
I mean, like my life, I didn't feel threatened, right? I when I was a little kid in the 80s, I never saw people die. I wasn't dealing with the shockwave of a bomb hitting my city. And
we live in a very safe society. We continue to live in a safe society, so therefore we're kind of immune to it. We're not used to these things that you're saying, and that's for sure. I think a lot of exposure is what we need. Maybe we need more of it. Maybe we need more citizen journalists. We need more phones taking pictures of things and letting that stuff be out there and be free so we can actually look it up. And
you're not wrong, but the problem is the problems are now very deep-rooted.
Yeah.
You can't just this is going to take more than a generation to fix.
Yeah.
Because children who are raised in those types of situations, in narco states, in warfare, in, throughout the Middle East, the Balkans, Central America, these places that have been problem spots through the 20th century, it's hard to imagine being able to fix that. A lot of those people, they have to, kind of just die off. And, if you want to make things right, then you have to start forgiving. You have to start, you have to not allow this to happen anymore. And then you have to just brace yourself for the impact of the evil that has been done in the past. Acknowledging it would be a great first step. If a lot of the conservatives could just come out and say, hey, Ronald Reagan, George Bush, these people were psychopaths, they ran drugs, they murdered people, they caused the situation, that would be a great first step. Right? And then say, okay, even going back to the Mexican-American War and being like, look, we're going to take the border down. I know a lot of conservatives aren't going to like this, but, you can't tell people that they have to stay in these terrible societies that we created, right? And it's going to change our culture. And a lot of people are going to be criminals, but guess what? We deserve it. We should have stopped it before. Now we have a chance. Right now, we can start stopping.
I think what we're boiling it down to and getting kind of to a point where I need to start wrapping this up, but I think we need a visionary leader who can take us out of that. Like you're saying, we need to forgive, we need to start moving on and plan next 10, 20, 30,
people need to understand it in and of themselves. They don't need a leader. The leadership has been the problem.
Well, yeah. We need a leader. We need a leader that's not part of that status quo. We need a leader that can actually take us in a new direction and get away from that. And
well, good luck with that.
I know, but it needs to happen. I mean, will it happen? I don't know. I can't. No one can predict that, but it does need to happen. But I'm pretty sure when my experiences with understanding what leadership is, and a good leader has a good vision, and a good leader talks about doing things for the good of the people, and for the good of the people means not just what we do here, but what we do out in the rest of the world, right? Those leaders, those types of people that speak that way, immediately get pushed away and just run over by the machine.
No, they don't. They don't even. Honestly, in any real sense, they just don't even exist. If you have these type of beliefs, you're not going to get anywhere in politics.
Well, they get pushed off. They get pushed out.
Sure.
And they get labeled as
and you get fake leaders like Donald Trump, right? Who has this like illusion of being this anti-establishment guy. He's not.
He is. He's one of the rich people. He's one of the guys.
He's completely entrenched. Yeah. But I mean, really, we have to go. You have to deal with the pain, right? This isn't going to be painless. If we want to fix things, we have to deal with the problems that we and our ancestors have caused. Mm-hmm. We have to deal with it because it's not just a minor thing. In these countries, it's not. Here to us, it's nothing. Like we've had good lives, but in the areas that were affected by the Balfour Declaration in Central America, and a lot of these places, they haven't had a good life. And if you can't, there's no way that you can just transition, right? The system has to collapse at this point. There's just no way around it. because it's too crazy. It's too psychopathic. Imagine trying to get rid of the borders. A lot of libertarians want to get rid of the borders, right? How is that going to work, right? It's going to be chaos. I'm saying we should do it, but it's not going to be just a cakewalk, okay? It's going to be really bad.
Yeah, it'd be messy at first, yeah.
But what else are you going to do? You've got to clear this bullshit out. You have to do it, right?
Yeah.
Like, otherwise, if you want to just stave it off, fine. But you're just going to make it worse down the road. Now we're at a point where there's no going back. Where we're at right now, we have to see a collapse in order to rebuild.
Yeah. And then grow through the pain.
You have to. You have to deal with it.
Yeah.
You have to deal with it.
Well, shit, how do we end on a happy note? It's a very serious topic. I don't think you're wrong anywhere. I mean, yeah, you're looking in an area that gets uncomfortable for a lot of people, and unfortunately, when we're all fat and happy, we love our comfort zones and we don't want to get out of it. People talk about civil war in this country. I'm like, yeah, really? Because they're not going to want to get up off their fucking video games and fight for more than a few hours, because it's not going to happen. A civil war is not going to happen, but I do think there is something that does need to happen to change what we're doing externally, which is bringing things, into the country. I agree with you, Chad. I think lots of good stuff. I think we got to wrap this up. This is getting long.
We do need to wrap it up.
We could definitely come back to this another time too.
Yeah. And the libertarians are the ones, the ANCAPs, anarcho-capitalists, voluntarists, that have the solution, and that's to stop murdering people in other countries, right? And on top of that, when in this country, economically, like, we are in a bad place, and this is the other area that the libertarians need to be. Hopefully, they could come to the forefront. Even if they do, you're not going to stop $33 trillion in debt. The U.S. government can't pay it, right? So it's going to collapse. Again, it's the same thing. We have to deal with that pain. We've allowed it to happen, right? People keep voting for people that are spending more and more money, right? We have to deal with the pain. It's not going to be painless. People are going to flood across the border. The economy is going to collapse. We don't have manufacturing. I mean, there's a lot of bad shit. It's really bad. The libertarians have the solution to it, but it's not pretty. The conservatives and the liberals are going to tell you they're going to fix everything and everything's going to be fine, right? The Republicans and Democrats,
got a 20-step plan, right?
They're going to say, well, we can, do this or that. It's not realistic, okay? You have to deal with the pain from the injuries that you've caused, right?
But you have to have a vision on how to get there, right? And then
it's simple. Disengage. Stop invading other countries. Yeah. Stop spending money that we don't have. The economy will collapse. It will.
Yeah.
Okay? It's not going to be easy. That's what's going to happen. And then from there, you can maybe be able to rebuild. I mean, it might be really ugly. A lot of people might die. People might starve. I mean, nothing can stop that at this point. We have to realize the sooner we deal with it, the less people are going to die.
Yeah. Yeah, and the way we're educating people now too, they're not going to be able to take care of themselves if we lose the supply chains and stuff we have. So
obviously not. Everyone's hyper specialized.
Yeah,
they can't take care of themselves because everyone's hyper specialized. Look at me in this industry that I'm in. It's service, right? It's like a circle jerk. Everyone's doing service to other people. And meanwhile, the Chinese and the Vietnamese are making all of our little component parts and stuff like that. And then you talk to a lot of people who are just like, oh, well, let them do it. We don't want to do that here. Well, what makes you think the Chinese want to fucking work in a factory making iPhones?
Oh, yeah, we hear about them, throwing themselves off buildings and stuff. Yeah.
No, they don't want to do it either. Yeah. They don't want to do it either.
No, it's not a good life for a lot of people. I think there are better ways, and I think, I think you've kind of shown that there's a different avenue in terms of just, conservatism and liberalism. There's libertarianism is a different avenue. I think you've kind of.
And I'm not going to sugarcoat it.
No, and you shouldn't. No, but it's
going to be painful.
It's one of those hard lessons we need to learn. Yeah. yeah, every generation does need some sort of painful lesson to go through. Hopefully it's not that bad, but, hoping for the best.
There's no point.
But you got to prepare for the worst.
Be
too.
logical.
Right.
Be logical.
Yeah.
There's no point in hoping for the best. Screw hope. Make it so.
Hope is definitely not a good plan, for sure. No, it's not a good plan, not a good strategy, but, I mean, the flip side of it is preparing for the worst, right? So that's actually one of the first lessons that my mother even taught me. It's like, prepare for the worst, hope for the best. That way, if the worst happens, you're prepared for it.
Well, stop accepting the status quo.
Right.
Stop accepting.
Open your eyes and look around and understand,
Don't allow this to happen anymore.
Yeah.
Stop it now.
Yeah.
We can't afford to pay the debt. We have to stop murdering people in other countries. You can't prop up dictatorships everywhere. All that stuff needs to stop. And when it does stop, the whole society, global society it's completely based in this psychopathic system. It has to completely collapse. And I'm sorry, that's going to be very painful, especially in America, where we're highly specialized and we're in a circle jerk economy. Everyone is literally just jacking the next guy off, okay, and providing him services, right? With this restaurant, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna cook you a fucking burger. I'm gonna cook you a pizza or a sandwich, right? I'm basically jerking you off, and then you're gonna be going to the next guy with the money from whatever service you're providing, and you're gonna be doing the same exact thing. That is not going to last. Okay, it's not going to last. The Luddites had, I think the Luddites had a very. They understood that you can't just get rid of craftsmanship and trades, right? And we're starting to understand that now, right? Because people in the conventional wisdom that you hear from a lot of capitalists now, I know you want to end this, but
No, keep going.
Is that just ship it overseas? Like, no one wants to do that here, right? No one wants to do it.
No, it's bullshit.
Right?
That's
and
bullshit.
so it started in England and the United States. They started manufacturing things, and they put the chair maker and the shoemaker and the tailor and everyone else out of business because they started producing it all in factories, right? And then the Luddites came out and they're like, no, they're like, we like our life. They're working with their hands. They have their families. They have their house. They have their shop. All that stuff. And then the Luddites are looked down on as being, basically, troglodytes. They're just, they're a bunch of But the thing is that working in a factory fucking sucks, right? It sucks. No one wants to do it. So now we've gotten past that in America, and a lot of American capitalists are like, well, just let the Chinese and the Vietnamese do it. They don't want to fucking do that shit either. It sucks. Yeah. Nobody wants to live in those kind of fucking situations, right?
Those are the type of people that are making those decisions that have never done it themselves, right? And maybe they can't fathom working in those conditions.
Well, they don't care. They don't give a fuck. Like, someone wants to commit suicide because they're working in the iPhone factory. Oh, we'll just catch them in a net and put them back in there. It's like, okay, whatever, But to me, I can't deal with that. Yeah. Like, I'm sorry. Like, that's not cool. Like, I empathize with the Chinese people.
No, I mean, no, and we're so distant from that it happens on the other side of the globe that we're like. We're so disconnected from it that we don't even think about it. I mean, people enjoy their iPhones, but they're not thinking about people that have died making those things in the process. So
their lives suck, dude. Who wants to punch a clock and go and look at a fucking gray wall and stamp some fucking part into a motherboard all day?
Industrial gray, man.
I mean, it's awful.
I've worked in so many industrial environments. It's why are these colors so depressing, man? Just little things. Well. Hell, I think I learned a lot. I hope everyone else learned a lot. And definitely, we need to continue this conversation.
We'll do it
again. Definitely. Cheers to everyone.
Cheers.
Now we're out.
My beer,
And have a good night.
According to a new medical study, depression hits losers hardest. The study found that extreme, debilitating depression most commonly afflicts those who are total screw-ups, who can't do anything right.